Okay, let's get the show rolling. We are going live on television, so if there's anybody who can't be here, they can watch it from home, and it will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later and tell all your friends and relations about it also. So welcome to the meeting today. I'm Dominic Golding. I'm director of the what we call at WPI, the Nantucket Project Centre. We've been running projects here since 2008, believe it or not. I'm sure many of you have been to our presentations before. But since 2008, we've had about 216 students come through, about 62 projects. We've done a lot of work with the town officers of one sort or another, various museums on the island, and also a number of the NGOs. We're delighted to be on Nantucket. It's always a marvellous experience for our students. It's a great experience for me. I hope it's a good experience for everyone else too. Today we've got 4 presentations. We've got 4 teams. This is the order of business. I'm not going to take up a lot of time here because I want to get the show rolling with the student presentations. They are the main attraction today. So we're going to start off with Sarah, Ivan, Maddie and Mike, who are going to be talking about coastal erosion. So if Maddie, Mike, Sarah, Ivan want to come to the front, we can get going. I should say too that all of the presentations, the reports will be available on this website too, which is the Nantucket Project Centre website. This is the URL, and that's hosted back at WPI.
All right, thank you very much for joining us today. Our project was on assessing Nantucket's relationship with coastal erosion, sponsored by the Nantucket Civic League. And we'd like to give a quick thank you to everyone that's helped us on our project so far, people that we've interviewed and residents that we have surveyed. I'm Maddie.
Ivan.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Mike.
So to take on the challenge of coastal erosion was a far more challenging task than we realized without ever having stepped foot on Nantucket. So it's not as simple as just coming up with one structure to stop erosion. You have to think about the aspects of technical and political, and you have to weigh them equally. So nature will always be nature. So if you're talking about thinking to put a structure in the ocean, you have to think about where town jurisdiction ends and where state begins. Or if you're talking about stilting your house, you have to think about height restrictions. So another problem that we were aware of before coming to the island was how the rates vary drastically depending on where you are, which led us to choose to work on Nantucket because they lose around 13 feet a year, whereas places like Sconset or downtown only lose about 2 or 3. The most affected area in Nantucket is Millie's Bridge. In 2017, following the storm, they installed beach fencing, which has been successfully building a dune. And in the spring of 2020, the majority of the sandy area next to it will be planted with beach grasses to further protect the bridge. So short term, we suggest they install more fencing to protect the new plantings. And long term, instead of suggesting rebuilding the bridge, we suggest a town organization to create a plan to assess the long-term vulnerability of the bridge. And later on in the presentation, we'll talk about which organization might do that.
And so getting into our challenges and recommendations, this is broken up into 3 parts: of technology, a policy, and organizational efforts. Starting off with technology, there are a variety of options we'll explore.
One of those first options is to continue to rebuild the dunes out in Nantucket. Rebuilding dunes through soft structures such as planting beach grasses or installing fencing is a widely accepted form of erosion control. And because it's relatively cheap to install, it's high up there on our list for us. However, you do have to consider that you will have yearly maintenance, as well as you have to consider any storms that may come through and their vulnerability with those. However, due to the environmentally friendly nature, we think that this would be a very effective strategy out for Nantucket. Now, you have several steps that you have to take in order to protect these building dunes, such as beach access points being clearly marked and beach driving restrictions, which we will get into a bit later. But to clearly mark your beach access points means that beachgoers will not be walking over your dunes, which would undo the years of buildup.
And so we had a survey sent out to roughly 500 Nantucket residents, and we got responses from 177, which is about 35% response rate, which is really good for this type of survey. And what this graph shows is the opinions of the effectiveness of both dune grasses and snow fencing. And one of the really big things that comes out of this is that more than a quarter of the residents for both options did not know whether these types of technologies were effective or not, which we'll get into later in our organizational efforts.
Our next option is dredging for beach nourishment, which is the process of obtaining sand from offshore and depositing it onto the beach, which is being nourished. This strategy has been successfully implemented in New Jersey's Cape May, as you can see on the pictures, like on the top. You can see on the left, you can see the picture of the beach before the beginning of the project, and on the right you can see after consecutive years of dredging. And it seems like a great solution. However, there are a number of aspects that must be considered before implementing it. For example, the sediment quality must meet certain standards to make sure that it does not destroy the environment of the beach. Also, the long permitting process, high costs of implementation, as well as the fact that the dredging should be repeated every 5 to 10 years. So we recommend the town to conduct a sand study prior to implementing this solution, and obviously look further into this option.
And so again, when the Nantucket residents were surveyed on the effectiveness of dredging, roughly 38% of the residents believed it was somewhat effective, with just over 50% thinking it is somewhat to very effective tactic. Again, just under a quarter of the residents this time did not know whether dredging was an effective strategy, which we will later explain as well in the organizational efforts.
Another technology we came across in our research was artificial reefs, and they can take on a variety of shapes and sizes, such as the one in the picture. Similar to this, a structure will be installed in Sacajah Pond pretty soon to protect both Pulpus Road as well as provide oyster habitat. Now, I know we're focusing on the south side of Nantucket due to the high rates, but something like this would never withstand the wave energy. So as a proactive approach, we suggest they put structures like this in Hummock Pond or Nantucket Harbor to protect important infrastructure, such as First and Second Bridge or Nantucket Marine.
Artificial reefs are related to our next option, which is the Joe Farrow project. The idea basically came almost by accident. An individual named Joe Farrow observed a sand buildup on the beach next to the Sacajah Pond, as you can see on the left down picture, due to the sunken ship. So he proposed a project which consists of the following stages. The first stage is gathering the data on the sand movement as well as wave action during a northeastern, which has been successfully implemented. The second phase is installing the temporary show modules, which are the metal containers, as you can see on the picture right here, in front of endangered houses in Nantucket. And the show modules, they will perform a function similar to artificial reefs, breaking waves, providing a new environment for marine life, as well as possibly the sand will start to build up besides the show modules. This is, after implementing the second stage and observing positive results, the next stage would be to take out the show modules and put concrete units instead of it. The idea looks very promising and is very novel. However, further research must be conducted, for example, the sand study. So we recommend the town and the people of South Shore to look further into this option and possibly proceed with stage 2.
And so when the Nantucket residents were surveyed on the effectiveness of artificial reefs, An overwhelming majority of 64% believe it is a somewhat effective tactic. However, we caution you in this type of method because of the high cost of implementation, as well as needing to know where the sand moves and the high wave energy action that could disrupt them.
Student houses is another option to mitigate the effects of coastal erosion. Elevating your house can help protect it from flooding and storms, and it has already started to be implemented in Nantucket, as you can see on this picture taken from Smith's Point. Another example is the Outer Banks in North Carolina, which faces a similar erosion problem. A lot of houses there are stilted. Moreover, the student houses can even be partially funded from Federal Emergency Management Agency, short for FEMA. So we recommend the homeowners of Nantucket to stilt their houses, ideally requesting funds from FEMA.
And so moving into our policy section, we're going to start off with an overlay district and setback law. Now, a setback law is widely used in coastal communities across the country. And what this would do is restrict new building structures within a certain distance from the coastline to hopefully prevent this type of issue shown in the figure, where we have an exposed septic tank on the beach and a severely eroded bluff right in front of a house. Now, this would be done through amending the current overlay district laws. And with the overlay district, another option would be to amend the height restriction in Nantucket to allow for the stilting of houses to be done. Instead of measuring from the ground, it would be measured from the first floor.
As you can see by this graph, when we surveyed Nantucket residents, there was a high amount of support for a setback law to be implemented, whereas there was a bit more confusion with implementing an overlay district. So this further encourages the need for better information for our homeowners.
So to get into one of the more controversial issues, beach driving is a huge attraction here. So to suggest an all-out ban would never pass. So we're more so suggesting restrictions. The beaches around the island are not what they used to be. And as the years go by, we're losing more and more drivable beach, causing people to have to drive up onto the dunes or at the dunes base, negating years of buildup. Not to mention the fact that areas in Nantucket that we will recommend year-round restrictions for already have like intermittent restrictions for plover nesting anyways, so our proposal wouldn't be that far of a stretch.
Again, when the Nantucket residents were surveyed on whether they would like to see a restriction on beach driving, an overwhelming majority, 79%, believe that this is a good idea for the town to look into for protecting dune restoration projects.
Moving into our last but certainly not least category of erosion control methods, we will be talking about organizational efforts. Now, we propose that there be a better collaborative effort between large organizations and individual homeowners. Most everyone that we've talked to so far has seen a need for us to bridge the gap between these large organizations and individual homeowners, and they wish to see erosion control applied more island-wide rather than a property-to-property basis. You can get problems such as scouring occurring when one person protects their property, but the surrounding properties are not protected. Therefore, we suggest a group-oriented focus on erosion control rather than individual homeowners.
A few weeks ago, we had a meeting at a Nantucket homeowner's house where we had a few Nantucket residents such as Vince Murphy and Charles Stott, as well as a USDA representative who discussed how the Department of Agriculture could actually possibly fund beach grass plantings for private coastal properties. But the main thing that we took from that meeting was the concept of a conservation district. This district would work with organizations around the island to figure out where coastal issues lie and determine where they can apply for federal funding.
Based on our research, we believe that town needs to work together with large conservation organizations to provide a better guidance for homeowners. Despite the town's initiatives to be more proactive by establishing hazard mitigation plan and coastal resiliency advisory committee, short for CRAC, we think that further action must be undertaken. We think that in the future, the committee could act more of a erosion czar, overseeing the implementation of previously suggested strategies, as well as organizing future plans. Moreover, we think that the committee could breach the gap in communication between those entities in collaboration with town and large and other conservation organizations by creating a web portal to share past, current, and future erosion mitigation efforts, such that the homeowners themselves could learn from those efforts and apply for their properties. We expect that this solution will take some time to establish itself because these communities have not worked on such level of involvement before. But we believe that it's a pretty inexpensive solution, and it will bring in and keep updated every stakeholder on Nantucket in regards to coastal erosion.
And so when Nantucket residents were surveyed on whether they believe an erosion committee or person should be implemented by the town, again, an overwhelming majority, 79% believed that this is a good idea. And we further would recommend that once the resiliency committee has helped advise on the establishment of the coastal resiliency plan, that they help guide and provide oversight on any erosion structure that homeowners would like to implement.
As you see by this graph, when we asked Nantucket residents how familiar they are with erosion control methods being used, 57% said that they're only somewhat familiar, with even as much as 10% saying they're not familiar at all with certain erosion control methods. This shows that there could be a better platform to educate homeowners on the erosion control methods that are available to them. Lastly, when we asked what they think that our sponsor, the Civic League, could do, there was a high amount of support to see the Civic League take on a larger role in terms of providing information to homeowners, coordinating efforts, lobbying the town, and raising funds for erosion control efforts.
Now, are there any questions?
I'm interested in learning more about your suggestions. Some of them are very radical for Nantucket, especially the putting the big concrete barriers off our shores and the height restrictions. I mean, lifting height restrictions. Mm-hmm. That's radical. Do you have research and studies and data to back up your suggestions available to the public? Where could I find that information?
Yeah.
Well, for some of the options, the town would certainly need to do more research, such as the sand study, to know where certain things could be done, such as the dredging and the module project that we suggested. We don't have any current, say, data on any of these types of things, other than past knowledge of what has worked and what hasn't worked in other areas.
But we do have more info in our report.
But if you would like more information, there is more detail in the report.
Hi, thank you. I know this was about erosion control. Was there any consideration taken into any type of managed retreat?
Managed. Let's talk about that. I mean, from what we saw, nature is nature, and it's up to the homeowners to decide if they want to retreat. Really? Do you have more?
Yes.
Do you have more info?
Through managed retreat, I don't believe so. I think it's. Oh, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks a million. Incredibly well presented and good work. I did have a question about the beach driving. Do you think there's any scope to change beach driving practices on Nantucket and make it into a seasonal thing, just for, say, 1 month a year, August, perhaps? Could that be a way of dealing with it? And then have driving corridors so that you can protect the embryonic dunes?
Yeah, that could definitely be taken into consideration for the beach driving restriction. We understand that because it's such an important part of town revenue, we didn't want to propose an all-out ban, thus the restriction, but potentially in the future, in order to put the dunes protection first, you could do seasonal restrictions only for beach driving.
You know, in terms of beach driving, I think I would make sure everybody understands we have a map on the town website which already restricts driving on a great many of our beaches. And when you look at the map, beach driving is allowed in a very limited series of sections of the island already. So the town faced that issue, 20, 25 years ago, and voted in favor of the restrictions we now have. So it's not so politically impossible in the way you mentioned.
Any other questions for the erosion team? All right, well, thank you. Thanks, team.
Thank you so much, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're the WPI students working on the Moby sculpture with the Marine Mammal Alliance Nantucket and the Department of Public Works.
I am Leonardo Go, and I'm a mechanical engineering major.
I'm Cameron LeBlanc, and I'm a biomedical engineering major.
My name is Evan Ryan, and I'm a mechanical engineering major.
And I'm Henry Stadolnik. I'm a double major in computer science and in interactive media and game development. So I make games, which, as you'll soon see, has nothing to do with this project.
That's because our project is to design something that will face an issue known as coastal litter. Now, coastal litter can be defined as the presence of man-made or artificial waste being released into coastal environments such as beaches, shorelines, and the surrounding water in the sea. And this is a very widespread problem around the world, and it's been around for a long time, and we're only realizing now the devastating impacts it has on the natural environment and potentially human health as well. And as you can see on these images on the screen, these were all photos of pieces of coastal litter ranging from bottle caps to fishing gear to plastic bags that were all found on Nantucket. And these are some of the animals that are being affected by coastal litter here on Nantucket. And Nantucket is just one of many places that have this problem. So what can we do to try to address this issue? Well, let's try something a bit creative.
So combining art with activism isn't necessarily a new idea. Here are 3 examples of prior projects that are addressing this coastal litter issue. On the left, we have Yoshi the fish, which is made completely out of found objects on the beach and collects a variety of different types of litter and is one of the main inspirations for our project and one of the first of its kind. In the middle is Tread Goldfish, which is similar to Yoshi, but it is made completely out of metal and contains only plastic bottles. The unique part about Tread Goldfish is that it is shaped in the symbol of the town, which is a crescent and a star. And on the right is a right whale made by an organization called Keep Golden Isles Beautiful, which shows the shocking image of a whale being fully filled with plastic and aluminum litter.
So, to combat this problem on Nantucket, we would like to introduce to you Moby the sperm whale. Moby is the focus of our project and functions not only as a receptacle to clean up litter off of the beach, but also as a means to raise awareness of what littering does to the environment and its wildlife.
These are the objectives that the Moby project set out to accomplish. First and foremost, we wanted to, as Cam noted, we wanted to raise awareness about the issue of coastal litter and the harm that it does to the environment. Human actions like littering result in what is known as slow violence. This causes long-term harm to the environment over a widespread area and a long range of time. And it's often done so gradually that it's hard to see the effects until it's too late farther down the line.
The next objective would be to reduce coastal litter locally by providing an appealing receptacle for litter that's found on the beaches.
And providing this receptacle gives people the proper opportunity to engage in this type of pro-environmental behavior. And this is further encouraged through informational signage that will accompany Moby.
Finally, we hope that through giving the people this interaction with our sculpture Moby, that we will be able to inspire them to take action against the issue that is coastal litter and therefore promote long-term changes for a better future.
So one of the first things our teams needed to decide when we got on the island is what's the optimal location for Moby would be. So shown are 6 images of the preliminary options that we were considering.
After some assessment, we decided the best beach to place our sculpture would be Surfside Beach. This is for several reasons. One is that Surfside Beach is one of the more popular beaches on Nantucket and receives the most people during the summer season, so there would be more people seeing the sculpture and gathering litter to put inside of it. As well as this, Surfside Beach is one of the more easily accessible beaches for the DPW's cleaning team, as it has several paved areas for them to drive their vehicles. And one more thing is that Surfside Beach is located on the southern edge of Nantucket, and this area often gathers the most litter out of other areas on Nantucket. As you can see in the superimposed image, Moby will be placed not directly on the beach, but on an area that is close to the parking lot. And the reasons for this is that it's a lot more easy for the DPW's cleaning team to just drive up next to the sculpture and empty it when they need to. And it's also more stable to place the sculpture on this flat area of land rather than on the soft sand on the beach. And this would require a special permit to do so. And finally, placing the sculpture directly onto the beach would ruin the overall aesthetic of the beach.
So early on in the project, the DPW introduced to us these wooden waste enclosures they have. They're designed to each hold 2 different waste barrels. They can be holding a variety of different things like various types of recyclables like metal and whatnot. And these are used to house them in a way that makes them more aesthetically pleasing and also protects them from the elements and from the environment. They suggest the idea of us incorporating these into our sculpture.
The design of Moby went through several different iterations. We began in the first weeks by having a completely metal sculpture. The frame would be made of metal rods, and the whole sculpture would be covered in mesh so that you can still see inside and see a whale literally filled with litter. Once we were introduced to the wooden enclosures that Henry just described, we created our second iteration, which was more of a hybrid between the metal and wooden enclosures. So the wooden enclosures would be located in the middle of the sculpture to include the DPW's waste streams, and then the head and tail would still be mesh and see-through steel so that you can see the whale filling up with litter. When we went to the third iteration, we added a bit more details like flippers, the ridgeline along the back, and the eye. And because of the location of Moby, right next to a bus stop, we turned the tail into a bus stop shelter. And then on the bottom is our final iteration of Moby.
So to recap and go through all the parts of Moby, there are 4 main features on this sculpture that have been divided into 3 main segments. The first segment is the head of the whale, and this is the part that actually collects litter that people find on the beach. There are 3 barrels inside that actually collect the litter, and they are hidden by walls of coastal litter that has been gathered for static display and incorporated into the walls of the head. There are slots near the top of the head that allow people to deposit their litter, and there is a hinged door in the front of the head that allows for the cleaning team to open it up and access the barrels and empty them. The second part is the body of the whale, and this is made out of 4 customized wooden enclosures that were based on the original enclosures that were mentioned earlier. The only difference is that their roofs have been modified to fit the shape of the whale. And finally, the third section is the tail, and this consists of 2 parts. The first part is a static litter display made of a similar material as the head. It's wireframe, and this serves as a static display filled with litter to maintain the image of a whale that is filled with litter. And finally, the flukes have been used as the roof of a bus stop. The tail actually has gone through several different design iterations because it originally wasn't going to be used as a bus stop. It was originally just going to be the tail of the whale being raised in the air as though it's about to dive. But as the location was a very popular tourist area and many people tend to take the bus there, we decided that we might as well use the wide, flat flukes as a roof for a bus shelter. Our original design used a central pole in the middle of the tail that also held a sign, and we tried disguising this with several objects such as making it look like a rope or a harpoon or a surfboard. But eventually we decided the most aesthetically pleasing and stable design would use 2 poles instead of 1, located at the very tips of the flukes, and these would be decorated to look like water dripping off of the tail. As for the waist enclosures in the body, these were simply based on the original design, but given a separate roof to better fit with the body shape of the whale. They otherwise serve the same purpose.
The head section of Moby underwent the most change. We started off with just a slight sloped platform on the inside of Moby to push the litter to the sides where it would be emptied, but then created 2 variations with a higher slope, one with a curved slope to maximize the volume inside of its head, and then one with a slanted slope to maximize the efficiency of pushing the litter out. Towards the end of our project, we had 2 final designs. One was with 5 wire baskets inside that would be emptied from the side and still see-through, so you can see all of the static litter, or the litter that's being collected inside of Moby. And then we have the final design on the right, which included 3 barrels on the inside and the static walls filled with litter as described before. And we went with the barrel design. On to the more detailed portions of Moby. As you can see, it's quite detailed, and I'm not going to have you read all these small gray numbers, but we are going to be working with the local artist Billy Sherry to construct this sculpture. Billy Sherry recommended us a number of materials for what to make Moby out of. He suggested stainless steel as the top option, but it was also quite expensive, so he said to research into different coating types. So we contacted the company Wirefab Inc. in Worcester, Mass, so that they could possibly give us some advice on what materials we could use. And after speaking with their Vice President of Operations, Jim Hall, they suggested a number of helpful materials and also offered to donate a lot of material to us. For the frame of Moby, Billy suggested that we would create it out of either steel round stock or flat stock, and then cover the frames with steel wire mesh in order to still see inside the sculpture and see all the litter that's collected. For the fluke of the tail, it will have steel sheet metal so that sunlight and rain still can't get through it and it's still serving as a bus shelter. And then for the wooden enclosures in the middle, we will have the DPW provide the wood and create the custom enclosures. For the dimensions of the sculpture, it will be approximately 33 feet long, and it will be 6 feet wide by 6 feet tall on the body, and then the fluke of the tail will be 7 feet high and 10 feet long.
So, while it's all well and good to have a design of the sculpture, it's also important as a piece of functional art for people to understand how they're supposed to interact with it and use it. So we decided to accomplish this by creating signage to go alongside it. This was our initial draft. It has the right ideas, but it's very busy and complicated. What it's trying to do is show people how they can interact with it and what the issue is trying to address is. We decided it would be more effective to split this into 2 separate types of sign. First off, there's the instructional sign, which informs people just how to use the sculpture. This was an early version of it where we tried out having different icons to represent the types of litter. Now, a flaw with this is that if people don't recognize the icons they're showing, then it might be very confusing for them, and it's also just a very busy sign overall. So we kept iterating. We tried a version that had using photographs. We have placeholders where we didn't have ones readily available, and this also tried to minimize the amount of text even further. But ultimately, we took it a step further, and we made the sign like this. This is based directly off the type of signage that the DPW already uses. It has a symbol label and arrows showing where to put that type of litter, in this case, beach litter. And we also have an additional note at the bottom reminding people to not put recyclables that already have proper places to dispose of them, or compostables, which would be problematic to leave in the head because they would rot and cause problems that way, over inside the body. And over here is the final version of the informational sign, which is the other side of it. This one, I'm not going to read this out to you, but there are 4 main areas it covers. It talks about the issue of coastal litter itself and why it's a problem. It talks about the rationale behind the sculpture and what it's trying to do. It talks about how people can make an impact in their own lives through both the short term helping clean up litter and long term making changes in their own litter habits. And it also talks about ways so people can share or spread the word about the sculpture through things like social media.
So to address the raising awareness aspect of our project, we met with local Nantucket school systems, in specific the intermediate school, Cyrus Pierce Middle, and the Nantucket New School. And we met with some of their teaching staff and proposed some of our ideas as to how to get their students involved with the project. Some examples would be conceptual Instagram posts that would go on the Moby social media pages, radio spots that would inform people on how to interact with Moby, as well as maybe having the kids have their own found litter and making their own mini sculptures. It was decided that the best use of our time left on Nantucket was to present the students with a presentation about coastal litter, our project, and how we're using plastics.
So, throughout the course of this project, we end up coming to several conclusions about this type of work.
During this project, we learned that the best way to address an issue of slow violence, such as coastal litter, is to use a solution that creates a long-term effect. Now, something as simple as cleaning a beach is a good thing, but it doesn't always have a long-lasting effect that, eventually leads to a significant amount of change. So we figured that what ought to be done is to create something that allows for people to not only take action and also learn, but also to have a deeper connection and to actually take it to heart so that we can actually initiate a significant amount of systemic change over time.
And a great way to do this is through functional art, which is a creative approach to solving this problem. So constantly throughout this project, we were trying to balance the form of the sculpture, that being the eye feeling and aesthetic, with functionality. For example, how easy it is for the DPW to empty it, all while trying to keep it relevant to Nantucket. And we did this by creating our sculpture in the shape of a sperm whale, one of Nantucket's most historical creatures.
And finally, we have a set of recommendations for our sponsors.
So our first recommendation would be for our sponsors and all collaborating parties to continue to communicate and work together to see through to the installation and construction of Moby. And we understand that multiple channels need to be addressed in order for this project to have its maximum impact, such as the creation of posters and additional news coverage.
We also encourage our sponsors to use social media as a way to further increase the reach of the sculpture. It can be used to directly make posts informing about the sculpture and its message. It can also be used to spread photographs and other types of media people have created related to Moby, such as just photographs they took with it and wanted to spread around. In addition to all this, it can be a great way to get students engaged. They could, as a project in class, for example, they could develop various posts that could go up on these social media pages to raise awareness about the issue and get them engaged in thinking about it.
We recommend that our sponsors also monitor the intake of Moby, as if any compostable materials were to end up inside the head, they might decay and rot, and if that were to happen, that would be a problem, and we suggest that they possibly make some changes to the signage then, so that people can be informed of what they're supposed to do with the sculpture.
Finally, we would like to recommend our sponsors to continue the project even after Moby has been constructed and installed. And by this we mean to potentially create even more sculptures, perhaps more sperm whales like Moby, and create what we'd like to call Moby's pod, or create other litter receptacle sculptures based on other iconic animals of Nantucket, such as the seals, the turtles, the sharks, and maybe other species of whales. This would also provide another opportunity for student interaction, as the students can help think of names for the sculptures or even come up with designs for them.
We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, collaborators, and everybody else who helped us throughout this project.
And we'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to us. Any questions?
Great job, thank you. 2 questions. One is, and again, maybe it covered it, but I missed it, which is what's the feedback of the kind of reward of seeing the accumulation? Because if you keep taking stuff out of the bin, it's like, well, it's empty again. So, is there, and the other, is there any kind of use of a solar panel that would be able to kind of reward people or give information about the process or progress of it? Again, because if you, the second one where that Treddy goldfish guy, when you throw it in there, you can see that the thing is filling up, and that's feedback. So, but in an enclosed structure, as people get stuff, and I guess maybe the third thing was, You want people to pick up stuff. Either suggestions as like when they're down on the beach, to use their coolers, or do we have some kind of bag or something because beaches have a lot of crap on them sometimes. So those are my three things.
So, so the head and tail, the tail is only static. That's constantly filled with litter, so that still gives off the message. And then the head itself, while it can be emptied, there are static displays of litter on the sides to hide the barrels that are emptied. So there's always a show of litter, and it's always communicating the message. It's not empty ever.
And we did explore like having that reward system of actually seeing it fill up.
As for the solar panels, off the top of my head, you have it powering lighting to illuminate signs and the bus stop, for example. So that could be a valid use for it. But I'm not sure exactly how you would have that tie into a reward for completing this, for interacting with the sculpture.
This says thank you.
That's an
Yeah,
option.
that would be a good idea. We should probably put thank you signs.
Yeah, make it more personable. Yeah. All right. In the back. This would not. This will not be left out year-round. This will be seasonally deployed, and it's designed to be movable in sections. So if at any time they need to move it out for inclement weather or any issue like that, it is possible to do so. Also, the waste barrels in the center part of this are actually just repurposing the ones that are currently on Surfside Beach. So this basically just adds an additional way to present them in a more appealing manner. So the only actual thing this adds in terms of collecting litter is the head receptacle.
Well, yeah, we did get a lot of good reception from the kids when we did our presentation, and that was one of the things that we're talking about is, being such a young age, and we're young too ourselves, and we're talking about like how they can get involved, and just being able to start a conversation with other people as to what is impacting our environment is also just a really good way to get involved.
The kids had a lot of great ideas to add as well. Like lots of them thought of different locations that we hadn't even heard of. We're not too familiar with the island, and there's other beach locations that we hadn't seen or hadn't visited that we didn't know of. And they had a lot of great ideas about that, as well as possible future sculpture ideas.
Great job. Curious if you had considered having a recorded message in Moby that could be accessed by the pressing of a button to provide an educational aspect, particularly to younger people.
We had not considered that, but that would be a great suggestion. That would also tie in nicely with the solar panel idea.
Yeah. And we could include that possibly on the signage.
Yeah. Like it's very conceivable for there to be a button at the bottom of the signage, for example, you can press and it just plays the sound. So,
thank you.
You could use weight for the reward system.
Oh, what? Sorry?
Use weight.
Weight?
As more and more.
Oh, like a digital display of how much?
Okay.
Like a scale.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can have even though you wouldn't necessarily see it in the moment, you could have a display showing how much is collected over time, since they would be monitoring that. Yeah.
And also inform DPW when to come and collect it.
I suppose that's true.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right. Hello. My name is Catherine Stovall.
I'm Peter Jankowski.
I am Ryan Luisi.
And I'm Avery Wallace.
And we were working with the Nantucket Historical Association to make the old mill new. So we took this picture on one of our first days here. This was at the Fall Harvest Festival. These two goats are named Dodie and Chinook. We thought that this was kind of funny and kind of welcoming for us, as our school mascot is Gompy the goat, and he's very beloved at our school.
So the NHA essentially wanted us to design and build a set of interactive exhibits that could live at the old mill or at the Whaling Museum. So after a bit of research and looking at the exhibits that last year's project team developed, we came up with a couple of wooden prototypes that we built in the NHA's wood shop. And for some feedback, in addition to what the NHA gave us, we also went to the third graders at the Nantucket Intermediate School, and they gave us a bunch of useful feedback, which we incorporated to make kind of more a finalized exhibits out of these initial prototypes. And in addition to these physical exhibits, we also collected some of the content for a digital exhibit, which we will talk more about later.
So now I'm going to talk a bit about one of our first tasks on island, which was evaluating the state of last year's exhibits. As you can see on this slide, all of last year's exhibits are pictured. Their theming from last year that they chose was to exhibit simple machines at the old mill. So combine concepts about simple machines with aspects of the old mill in their designs. Going from left to right on the bottom quickly, we have their exhibits How Many Sheets to the Wind on the left, which was meant to teach about the choices that millers have to make in determining how many sheets to put up on the mill when it's in operation. In the middle, you can see how fast can you spin the grindstone. Their exhibit focused on gearing and how that relates to the old mill. On the right of the slide, you can see a ramp and pulley based exhibit called Race to the Top, which was meant to teach about how corn was transported to and into the old mill. And at the top of the slide was Can You Lift the Box of Rocks, which was a lever arm that they used to relate to the mill's static brake. So when we arrived on the island, we found that the last year's exhibits were not really in a state of repair. None of them could really be used anymore. And after some discussion with members of the NHA, we found that we could spend the time to repair last year's exhibits, and some of their concepts were perhaps workable, and we've adapted some of them, which we'll get to shortly. But the main thing that the NHA wanted us to do was to maximize the kind of reach and impact that our exhibits could have, since they're really trying to they're really trying to teach about the mill in a broader sense than just at the mill site. Part of our work was to kind of spread the accessibility of that. So we decided that the main considerations we'd be taking into for our exhibits would be to improve upon durability, since last year's exhibits were falling apart, and in terms of size and portability. So the first exhibit, or one of the first exhibits that we put together, was to remake last year's Box of Rocks exhibit. Our theming that we went for with our exhibits was to incorporate STEM concepts into the old mill, or aspects of the old mill. So we modeled our lever arm in a similar fashion after the counterweight Box of Rocks for the static brake inside of the old mill. And we started with a 3D model of our exhibit. We made 3 major adjustments over last year's Box of Rocks exhibit for our original design. As you can see here, we scaled it down significantly from last year's design. We added 3 rungs on either side to allow users to adjust the location of the weight and the pulling rope on the lever arm, so they can see how more or less difficult it is to use the lever. And we also added 2 lever arms instead of just using one central one, to try to avoid the same problem with last year's exhibit, which was that the center post for it had split and broken. So based on feedback that the NHA and the 3rd grade classes gave us, the concept for the exhibit was still well liked. We were able to communicate forces and levers fairly well with this exhibit, but we found that bigger really was better in this case, and we didn't bring it here, but we made a remake of last year's exhibit, a full-size Box of Rocks lever, which, if you can see in comparison to Ryan, is quite large. We added a few adjustments to it that would improve it. So we added a spring scale that you could move between different rungs on the lever to demonstrate how much force you would be using to lift the Box of Rocks with. We also added, if you can see in the middle of that slide there circled, was a hydraulic brake meant to slow down the lever to avoid unnecessary wear and tear and strain while it was in use. And we strengthened the center post originally over last team's design.
So the second exhibit that we made, we titled Grinding to a Halt. We modeled it after the mill's brake band, which is circled in that picture. It uses the Box of Rocks as a counterweight, and the brake band is pushed up into the mill's crown gear, which prevents the crown gear from moving, which prevents any of the internal mechanism of the mill from going. The idea that we borrowed from this brake band was the simple STEM concept of friction. And with that design, what we did was we made in our 3D model, we basically, excuse me, The design was to include a spinning disc that would spin on its own freely, and a simple brake that, when applied to the spinning disc, would slow down the disc. So that was the idea. That is our initial 3D model there, and on the right is the first prototype that we made. After we brought it to the third graders at the school, one of the things that we learned from them was that it was rather difficult to spin this disc without a handle, so we installed a handle.
So our third exhibit that we made was based on the crown gear and cage gear, or lantern pinion. And it would also adapted some of the concepts from one of last year's exhibit. The main point of this exhibit was to teach both translation of motion in how when you turn this crank here, it spins the model of the crown gear, which in turn spins the model of the cage gear, and to also teach people inertia. We teach inertia by adding corn at the top as it's spinning, which as it spins, the corn is then thrown off. This was one of the favorite exhibits that we made when we went to the elementary school, and we're very happy about that because this exhibit, out of all of them, is the best one, and it's simulating what it might look like and sound like inside of the mill. And because the mill is not very accessible for like handicapped people or people who have difficulty with stairs, this allows us to have a larger audience of people who can learn about and understand the mill.
So the fourth exhibit we made, which we call Turning the Light, we essentially wanted to show how you can use wind in other ways. Because obviously the old mill uses wind to turn the grindstone to grind corn, but it can also be used to generate electricity, as you can see on the right, with the wind turbine that is seen near the Nantucket High School. And so for that, we want essentially to have a smaller version of the mill that you could turn the vanes by hand, and if you turned it fast enough, it would turn on the light. But due to size constraints, we felt like the vanes would be maybe a little too fragile and also could pose a potential safety hazard if you're spinning them really fast. So we ended up just designing it to look kind of like the top of the mill, where you essentially you have a crank, which if you turn fast enough, and hopefully you can see this, you turn on a little light inside. And so we just have a hand crank, which goes through some gears to a motor, which if you spin fast enough, is able to turn on the light. And so when we went to the third graders, they had some ideas about the light, because at that point it was kind of just a light in a box. And they had some ideas about maybe have it look like something else. And so one of their suggestions was to make it look like a lighthouse. And so we modeled it after Great Point Lighthouse, sorry. Some of the other recommendations I had was to have a free spinning handle so it's easier to turn, and also add some rubber feet to the bottom of the exhibit, because in order to turn this fast enough, it'd like to move around a lot, and so the rubber feet really help it from moving around when you're trying to turn it fast enough to turn on the light.
So one of the other major interactive that our project team undertook was to make the digital interactive exhibit. And how we did this was we agreed with the NHA that it would be best if we, rather than making the entire exhibit ourselves, we gathered all of the relevant data, relevant materials that we could, and then handed it off to Novation Media, who made all of the other exhibits for the lots of the other digital exhibits for the Whaling Museum and their other properties, because we thought it would just be more professional and much better made that way. So we took a lot of inspiration from some of the Whaling Museum's other digital interactive exhibits, and we decided to kind of replicate that format a little bit. So what we're looking at here is going to be the home screen of the digital interactive exhibit. So when a user walks up to it, this is the first thing that they're going to see. And say that particular person wants to learn more about the gears in the exhibit. So they'd go over and they'd touch the gears, where it would zoom in, and you'd be able to get a better view of the gears in motion. And then there would be a little icon that you could touch so that you could learn more about that part of the mill. And when you touch that icon, it would play a short video clip.
So The primary content of the video clips consists of interviews that we conducted with people that have connection to the mill. It also consists of stock footage that we took of the mill and also stock footage given to us by Novation Media. In total, we found that we had about 4 hours of footage from all of these sources. And so we were also given the time constraint of 15 minutes for the entire interactive. So we then edited down the 4 hours of footage into about 1.5 minute long clips each, relevant to one specific section of the mill or millers or something along those lines. So again, the primary content of those clips is the interviews. We interviewed all of these people. They all have one connection to the mill or another. For example, we interviewed Elizabeth Gilbert. She is currently an NHA interpreter, and she was also the wife of John Gilbert, who in the 1970s was responsible for restoring the mill to operational capacity. So, in conclusion, we made the 4 smaller scale physical interactive exhibits that can be used either at the old mill, maybe at the Whaling Museum, or for educational purposes like school visits. We made the larger scale Box of Rocks exhibit, which can be used at the old mill, and we made the contents for the digital interactive exhibit, which can be used either at the old mill itself, perhaps online for promotional material, or for educational purposes. These are just some people we wanted to thank. They were very instrumental in helping us with our project. Does anybody have any questions? Also, if anybody would like to interact with these exhibits after the final presentation, so after the next group, we will still be around, and anybody who wants to interact with them can.
If anybody has any questions, don't be shy. Please come to the microphone. I think you guys got off lightly.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Neil Keklik.
I'm Greg Raymond.
Jordan Gold.
Sam Gelly.
We are 4 students from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. We have worked with the Chamber of Commerce for the last 2 months to produce a smartphone application website. So what's our project purpose? Why are we here? We wanted to increase visitation to the island during the shoulder season. And one of the ways we wanted to do that was create a smartphone application website.
So as Neil said, our main goal is to aid the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce into getting more traffic, more visitation to the island during the shoulder season. Now we did that by obtaining 3 objectives. First, we did interviews and sent out a survey with local business owners on the island to get their assessment of why they close when they do. The second objective for our project was the iterative design of the application and the website. This entailed beta testing as well to make sure we made the application as user-friendly as possible. And our third objective was developing training materials and videos for the Chamber of Commerce, business owners, and whoever's going to be using the app to ensure that they're using it properly in the most efficient way. So our view of the problem. So as we came to the island, we view it as a vicious circle and a vicious cycle. You can start at any point on the circle, but we start with the businesses that close. They're closed, so now the visitors that are off the island don't think there's anything open to come and enjoy on the island, and now consumers stop coming to the island. And it's a vicious cycle that continues on with whoever visits the island during the off-season. So our solution
is, again, the mobile application website. And as Greg was saying, when you introduce this website and this mobile application into any part of the circle, you can see that things start to change and the problem will get solved. We'll explain it more in detail with later slides. So the overall process that we followed while on island is that first we wanted to collect data. So we did this through business interviews, a business survey. Some of you may have taken that. Then we developed. So we made the app, we made the website from the information that we received, and we tested the application, the website, with business owners to gather feedback on it. And finally, we made deliverables. This included training materials, as well as marketing materials, as well as the final product.
So our first step was conducting a business survey of the businesses on the island, and we did this just to get some initial data to work with. So we ended up with 134 responses, which was an 18% response rate which is really good for this kind of survey where you typically expect around 5%. And from this, we are able to get a lot of insights towards working on our product. So the first graph we're going to show you is the variation of staff size with season. As you all know, Nantucket's kind of a seasonal community. There's a lot more people here in the summer than during the shoulder seasons in winter. And as you can see, especially in the far right with the 25 plus businesses, there's nearly double the amount of businesses that employ 25 or more employees in the peak season, such as the summer, than in the shoulder season. This really accentuates just how seasonal the island is, considering this is only based off a portion of the island's businesses. And so our next graph we're going to show you is we asked businesses how they typically promote their own business during the shoulder season. As we all know, the shoulder season presents some more problems to businesses, such as less tourists and less customers to work with. So businesses typically do two major things. They either do promotions and discounts or marketing. As you can see, there's around 30% of businesses who replied that they did increased marketing and around 30% of businesses that did increased promotions and discounts. And these are two things our application will be able to help with. And another open response question we asked businesses was what they thought the chamber should do to increase business during the shoulder season. Now on this, we had similar replies with 30% wanting more marketing. And this was things such as marketing to outside markets such as Cape Cod and other states to let them know that Nantucket is still open during the shoulder season. Along with this, there was roughly 25% of people who wanted new major events. Some suggestions were things such as Oyster Festival / Scallop Festival or a music festival to lure in more tourists. There is a significant portion, though, 20%, that thinks the island is currently doing enough as is. And so lastly, we asked businesses how important they thought each of our proposed features were for the application. We got a resoundingly positive response to this, with roughly 75% of businesses all indicating that our selected major features were very important or important to them. These being updated business hours, current promotions, an interactive map of businesses, a business directory, and a calendar of events, which would all help increase marketing and advertise their promotions, which would help with some of our previously discussed problems.
So the second portion of our project was the actual development of the application on the website. But first, we'll talk about our experience with Christmas Stroll this past weekend. Obviously, one of the most iconic events that goes on in Nantucket during the off-season, shoulder season. And Jordan on the right, left, Sam on the right, escorting Santa off the ferry. Neil and I also helped out in the marketplace. And it was just really cool to see how many people actually went to the island during this time. As the off-season, as we've experienced, there's definitely a lot less people, but around the spike during Christmas Stroll certainly was incredible to see. And we also used our application. One of the features we tended to use was the searchable, the map that would zoom in on the island and we could pick out the icon that we wanted to go see and visit. So it just showed us the true potential that our application and website could have if it was used and marketed properly.
So let's show you what we did. So we started off with the website, and that's what will be launched first in order for businesses to put their information in, and then tourists will later use the mobile app. So the website has most of the same features. You can see on the sidebar there's today, events, places, and explore. We'll show you what those are later in the mobile version of it, but they're mostly the same. So we figured to save time, we cut that down. This is the today view. Mobile app settings. So this is where the chamber can send out push notifications as a new marketing channel for them. So when people download the app, just like a text message comes in from the top on your phone, Nantucket can also do that. This is where businesses can enter their information, their name, address, description, etc. Operating hours. So the main issue was that Google, Yelp, all these places, it only has Saturday through Sunday. There's no way to change that versus depending on the week or the month or the year, season, whatever it may be. This one does. So you can change it per day. You can change it per every day. You can change it per week, etc. And finally, promotions, where businesses can add little things that they're doing, not necessarily an event, but maybe something like oh, 25% off this item, for example. And even though we haven't had much luck with technology today, we're going to try a live mobile demo. Keep in mind that the businesses are real, but the operating hours and promotions are not. So don't go out and after this presentation and be like, why are you closed? So we're going to start off with the daily tab, which is basically a high-level overview of what's going on any given day. So it starts off with events, with Yoga with Barbara Rives, Play With Me, and all these other things that you can add to your favorites or get directions to. You can change this per day or just tap through. And of course you can get restaurants, but nothing's open that day. But here you can see Handlebar Cafe, technically open on the app, but I don't know. And all sorts of other things, activities, the Island Bike Company, all sortable through those categories up there. Next up we have events, which is basically the same thing except you can search for them. And you can see that it says one is now going, which syncs to the website, so businesses can gather insights on how many people are coming to their event or things of that nature. Next up, which is pretty cool, we have a map, which you can zoom in, you can see where you are. And it has little icons for all the events going on. And of course, add it to your favorite. Same thing for, what did I tap? Shop. Act 4170. And Force 5 Water Sports. Next up, places. Just like events, it's a searchable directory. Find what you're looking for. And you can see more details, which includes their hours for the next 2 months, and directions, and a way to call them. Come on. Next up, as I mentioned earlier, favorites. It's just a way to see what you've added and what you want to go to. And of course, those all sync. Karaoke already happened. Next up, we wanted to add a few features that were just for tourists and residents alike, just to encourage adoption. So we added the wave schedules where you can see the live location of any bus. I don't know if any buses are still running at this point, but yeah. It'll give you a list of all the upcoming arrivals for buses. Similarly, you can call cabs right from the app. I got so many calls when we were trying this out. The joke is old people. Same thing for flights. You can change that by day. Takes a little bit to load. Come on. Really? It's the Cybertruck all over again. Come on. There we go. And you can book it right from the app. Finally, we have the Islander card, which is a program by the Chamber, where if you have a certain code, you can type that in and get a nice little virtual Islander card. And each time we've presented this app, I've forgotten the password, and this is no exception. But take my word for it, if you check it and it's valid, you'll have a nice little Islander card that you can show around. And of course, a nice little blurb that has feedback, a rating system, the Chamber social medias, and a nice little blurb. And that's about it. So if we can just switch back there, that worked.
So obviously after completing this first iteration of the app, we had to test it with the people who are actually going to be using it. So therefore, we conducted the third portion of our project, which is the beta testing section. And through those beta tests, we concluded that there were three major things that we needed to change from the first original application and website design. The first on the application was the addition of a home page. Before, when you open the application, you were brought right to the daily page. And a lot of people were using it and seeing a lot of colors, a lot of arrows, a lot of things. They were very intimidated and not sure where to go with the first step on the application. So with the organized home page now, you have different tabs that you can choose where you want to go on the application, and you can pick and choose instead of just being forced to go in one spot. The user interface progression. So we were told by some feedback that the text was not as readable on the original one, as well as the colors were not as contrasting as needed to be. As you can see on the original, the search bar in the business directory is almost blending in with the background colors that we have on there. White on white was probably not the best. So what we did was we made a more stark contrast to the navy blue and the white, and we also made the font a little more readable for their user-friendly experience. And to simplify the web counter, this is now transitioning to the website. This is where the businesses enter in their hours of operation. Before, what we had these set the hour buttons on the bottom of the page. They were kind of hard for people to see. And also, people weren't as intuitive as we would like them to have been on where to enter the hours. So from this, we created this iteration. We moved the buttons from the bottom of the screen to the top, so it's obviously more easily seen. And we also put a little grayed out message to say enter your hours here, and the buttons are right there below.
Finally, we have deliverables. Again, this is everything from the training materials that we created to the marketing strategy that we recommend. So for the training videos, we thought that if a business was intimidated by the website or by the application, that this would not encourage them to use it. So we made 3 categories. The first, business details. So this is everything on how to add business name, whether you have a website, phone number, address. Next, we have a calendar, and that gives you instructions on how to use that calendar, so how to add your business hours to this as well. And then promotions. So again, if you have a 25% off sale, if you have an event that's going on in your business, you can add this here. And again, this video shows you exactly how to do that so that you don't have to worry about it. Again, for marketing success, we thought that there's 2 target audiences that we need to market to. First are consumers, and then our businesses. Businesses should be marketed towards first as to load on their information, so that when the consumer opens up the app, they are presented with accurate, relevant data. For the web launching, we'll have that done and published by December 2020. 2019. So for businesses, they can go on that, add in on their information, and then the following year, we'll launch the mobile application for consumers. And again, we want to thank you everyone who warmed us to the island, Remade, Nantucket Yacht Club for housing us, our sponsors, the Chamber, Young's Bicycle Shop for giving us bikes, and everyone we interviewed and beta tested. This concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you guys. Nice presentation. And does anyone have any questions for the team? I'm sure they'll happily bend your ear about the technicalities of developing an app if you so wish. If you don't have a question now, you can always come up and approach any of our teams for other questions that you may have. Rob?
What is the cost?
To whom?
For the user.
So right now the app is free. Are you asking in terms of maintenance for the chamber or for the consumer?
Just any businesses who are consumers.
Right. So yeah, again, for the consumer, it's free. It's also free for businesses on island, every business. Again, that's up to the chamber too. If they want to do something in the future with chamber members, they can as well. But that's not up to our discretion.
Could you give some examples of how the businesses that receive feedback from people who say, yeah, I think I'll do that today, might benefit? Right,
so that's supposed to gauge interest. We're not suggesting that as a reliable source, but again, that's a way to tell how many people are going to come to your event, so that maybe you can prepare for it. Yes, go ahead.
Do businesses load their information directly onto the site, or they send it to the chamber to load?
So the website's for businesses. You can access certain features on the application, but not all of them are there for consumers. It's more towards the businesses to load on information. So they can load on your business name, website, phone number, description, address. You can load on your hours. You can load on everything from promotions as well. So that's up to the business to do.
But the daily changes? Or
Yeah, that's everything you can do is on the website.
How does the algorithm work for daily events? What's the first time pops up?
So for daily events, it's everything that's pretty much open. We don't have it filtered towards who's having a promotion the earliest time. Sam can expand more on that too.
For events, it's by start time.
Where are you getting that information?
That's from Chamber Master.
You mentioned
Stroll, of course, bringing a lot of people throughout Oyster Festival, Scout Festival, whatever. Did you get any kind of feedback or any suggestions to add to those ideas?
So are you mentioning feedback for events that we could hold in the future?
Right, just of different events that would bring people.
So we got responses back on that. Again, that wasn't our main focus. The general consensus is that the Chamber's doing a great job with the events that are being held now.
And from the survey, there were just a few additional suggestions of events that people might want to see. Music Festival and Scallop/Oyster Festival being the two most popular, with a few others such as like Sign a Cobblestone or other unique events being scattered throughout.
All right, well, I guess this about wraps it up. I'd like to thank the students for all their hard work this term. It's been a pleasure working with all of them. I'd like to thank all the sponsors and sponsoring organisations. It's also been a pleasure to work with you all. It's always a delight to come to Nantucket. We invariably have a wonderful experience and appreciate all that you do for us in hosting us for the 7 weeks that we're on island. I'd like in particular to thank Harvey and Young's Bicycles for providing us all with bikes, which is a great way to get around the island. I'd like to thank Remade for continuing to support the project in various ways. The Nantucket Yacht Club for providing us with accommodations. And the NHA gave us all passes to the museum, which I hope the students all took advantage of. And the Shipwreck and Lifesaving Museum also gave us a special tour, which was a delight also. And if I've forgotten anyone, my apologies, but thanks to everyone that's made this time on Nantucket another success, a great success for us as far as I'm concerned.